Tokyo, March 9, 1945, 11:45 p.m. The night air hung heavy over Tokyo. A warm wind drifted across the Sumida River, carrying the smell of charcoal and distant rain. Somewhere above the cloud layer, a faint rumble began to build, low, steady, mechanical. People paused in the narrow alleys, listening. It wasn't thunder. It was too constant, too vast. At 7,000 feet, the first B-29s crossed the coastline. Their bellies carried something new, clusters of M69 incendiaries, small canisters filled with jellied gasoline. Below, the city of wood and paper stretched endlessly, a sleeping giant waiting to ignite. In the lead bomber, a navigator marked the time, 23:58 hours. The doors opened. A trail of magnesium flares tumbled down, bathing the capital in ghostly white light. Seconds later, the bombs followed, thousands of them, until the night began to glow like dawn. Within minutes, Tokyo became a furnace, and as one city burned, the engines kept coming. One formation, then another, night after night, until Japan no longer slept. By the closing months of 1944, the war in the Pacific had changed its shape. The island-hopping campaign, an unrelenting grind of coral, blood, and airfields, had brought the United States Army Air Forces within striking distance of the Japanese homeland. The Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam had been seized at terrible cost, but their value was beyond measure. From these islands, a new kind of bomber could reach Tokyo itself. The aircraft was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Its wings spanned 141 feet. Its fuselage, pressurized from nose to tail, allowed crews to fly above 30,000 feet, where no Japanese fighter could easily reach. It carried 4 Wright R-3350 engines, massive temperamental machines capable of pushing the bomber over 350 miles per hour. Its range, more than 3,000 miles, promised to make Japan's cities vulnerable for the first time. But promises are fragile things in war. The first B-29 campaigns, flown from China and India under Operation Matterhorn, were plagued by disaster. Logistics were absurd. Every gallon of fuel used in China had to be flown over the Himalayas from India. Bomb loads shrank, maintenance broke down, weather obscured targets. And even when they reached Japan, the high-altitude raids failed. The bombs missed their marks by miles. The legendary Norden bomb site, so precise in clear skies over Europe, was helpless against the violent jet stream discovered above Japan. Winds exceeding 200 miles per hour tossed bombs far from intended factories and rail yards. The Superfortress was a marvel, but over Japan, it was blind. By November 1944, the U.S. had built vast airfields across the Marianas, each engineered by Seabees in record time. On the island of Tinian, the airstrips were so wide and long that 2 B-29s could take off side by side. Rows of aircraft stretched to the horizon, silver under the Pacific sun. From these new bases, the Extiant Bomber Command was formed, an elite striking force under the newly arrived Major General Curtis LeMay. LeMay was a technician of destruction. He'd honed precision bombing tactics in Europe against Germany's industrial centers. But in the Pacific, he faced a new puzzle. Japan's industry wasn't concentrated in massive factories. It was dispersed. Thousands of small workshops produced components in wooden houses scattered across cities. Precision meant little against an enemy who built in every block. Meanwhile, Japanese defenses adapted quickly. Radar stations spotted bomber streams, directing night fighters into their path. Anti-aircraft guns ringed the cities, their flak bursts climbing into the jet stream. The losses grew, but the results did not. Each daylight raid ended with charts showing targets untouched, production barely dented, and bombs wasted into the sea. The men were flying 15-hour missions for photographs of smoke and disappointment. Inside the Extiant Bomber Command, frustration hardened into resolve. LeMay studied the maps, weather reports, and strike photos. He noticed patterns, the same failures repeating. High altitude, precision attempts, daylight exposure. He had learned long ago that when something didn't work, You didn't repeat it. You changed it, ruthlessly. And so the idea began to form. If the B-29 couldn't hit Japan from the stratosphere, it would strike from the dark. Not at pinpoint targets, but at the cities themselves. Not with high explosives, but with fire. The thought was not new. The Royal Air Force had already tested the logic over Germany. But in Japan, the material reality made it different. Wooden homes, bamboo frames, sliding paper doors. Entire neighborhoods built from tinder. American analysts called them fire cities. Engineers at the U.S. Chemical Warfare Service had quietly prepared for this moment, developing new incendiaries, M47 napalm bombs, and M69 bomblets designed to start chain fires in dense urban grids. By early 1945, the pieces were in place: the range, the bases, the bombs, and a commander willing to strip away convention. LeMay's task was clear. If the high sky could not win the war, the low night would. The war in the Pacific was entering its final, merciless phase, one where science, strategy, and morality would all burn together. And for that transformation to begin, LeMay would have to tear apart everything his bombers had been built to do. Curtis LeMay stood on the tarmac of Tinian in February 1945, watching his crews prepare for another mission. The heat shimmered above the concrete runways. Mechanics shouted over engines as they loaded bombs beneath the bellies of polished aluminum giants. Each B-29 stood like a fortress of metal and fuel, yet they carried the ghosts of wasted missions. The war had reached a strange threshold. America's most advanced bomber could reach Japan, but not hurt it. LeMay was not a man for sentiment. He was an engineer in a general's uniform. He studied failure the way others studied religion, methodically, coldly. And what he saw in the data was simple. Altitude and accuracy had become delusions. The jet stream made aiming impossible, while clouds and weather ruined daylight attacks. Japanese factories were small, hidden, dispersed. The system demanded a new logic, a logic of area destruction. So LeMay began to rewrite the book on bombing. The plan to burn a nation's war machine. He ordered the bombers to fly low, no higher than 7,000 feet, dangerously close to flak and night fighters. He stripped away nearly all defensive guns except the tail turret, replacing weight with more fuel and more bombs. Armor plating was reduced. Precision was abandoned. What mattered now was volume. Tons of incendiaries saturating targets until entire cities vanished into flame. To carry out this transformation, the U.S. Army Air Forces turned to chemistry as much as aerodynamics. At the Harvard Underwater Sound Laboratory, scientists and engineers had created the M69 incendiary bomblet, a small, elegant weapon of terrifying purpose. Each bomblet was packed with napalm-thickened gasoline. When released from its cluster, it fell tumbling, armed by air pressure, and burst on impact, spraying fire through narrow streets and wooden homes. In testing, a single bomblet could ignite an entire mock neighborhood. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe. Each was mapped not by factories, but by fire potential, construction density, wind direction, proximity of water. The planners called it the urban industrial web theory. If the workshops that fed Japan's war machine were scattered among houses, then the houses themselves were the factories. To light them all, LeMay needed one thing: unbroken tempo. Tinian. The assembly line of war from the air. Tinian Island looked like a vast aircraft carrier made of coral. It was the most intensively developed airfield complex on Earth. 4 massive runways cut across its limestone spine, connected by endless taxiways and bomb-loading pits. The Seabees had turned it into a mechanized miracle, storage for millions of gallons of fuel, mountains of ordnance, and living quarters for 40,000 men. Every operation ran like clockwork: refueling, bomb loading, engine testing, mission briefings. The ground crews worked through the night, their floodlights painting the jungle in silver. The smell of gasoline, the taste of metal dust, the thunder of engines, this was the industrial heartbeat of the Pacific. It was here that the low-level incendiary raids were born, tested, and refined. The first experiments over Kobe and Nagoya proved devastating. Fires spread faster than the crews imagined. Japanese firefighting units, relying on bucket brigades and sandbags, were overwhelmed. The shock was immediate. Smaller raids caused destruction out of proportion to their size. LeMay's critics within the Air Force hesitated. This was not precision, it was annihilation. But the results were undeniable. For the first time, mission reports carried words like effective and complete burn. The next step would be Tokyo. The decision for Total Fire Tokyo was the heart of Japan's war effort. A sprawl of nearly 7 million people, factories hidden among homes, workshops feeding aircraft parts and weapon components into the national machine. Analysts at the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey had long labeled it the prime target. But until now, it had resisted conventional bombing. LeMay's plan, finalized in early March 1945, called for over 300 B-29s to attack at low altitude in the dead of night. They would carry a mix of M47 and M69 incendiaries, striking in a rectangular pattern designed to merge fires into one unstoppable storm. The attack would begin with Pathfinder aircraft dropping magnesium flares to mark the wind direction and aiming points. Then, wave after wave would pour fire across the city until oxygen itself became an enemy. At Tinian, the crews prepared in silence. They were told this would be different. No formation flying, no daylight precision, no escort, just the night, the ocean, and the red glow that would mark their success. By dusk on March 9th, engines began to start in sequence, hundreds of them. The ground shook. Propeller blades cut the humid air into thunder. As one flight lifted into the dark, others followed, their lights winking out over the Pacific. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay Tokyo, waiting, unprepared, and still asleep. But not for long. Angle I. The human element. Inside the B-29, the cabin lights were dimmed to a red glow. The smell of hydraulic oil mixed with sweat and cordite. 10 men sat in the narrow tube of the superfortress, each surrounded by humming metal, each aware that at this altitude, a single tracer could turn the aircraft into a torch. At 5,000 feet, there was no longer the comfort of pressurization or oxygen masks. The air was hot, the engines deafening. The gunners, stripped of their once massive turrets, now sat idle, scanning the black ocean below. In the nose, the bombardier leaned over his radar screen, the green pulse of the AN/APQ-13 painting the coast of Japan like a ghostly outline. They spoke little. The ritual of the flight was mechanical. Checklists, altimeters, timing. Outside, the world was invisible. Below, only darkness. Above, a faint starlight that offered no peace. Then, somewhere ahead, the first magnesium flares began to bloom. The city appeared, not in daylight, but in firelight. The crew watched in silence as the target filled the bomb site. The pilot called out, "Doors open." The bombardier released. A sudden light flooded the cabin, orange and white, the reflection of Tokyo burning. There was no cheer, no triumph, just the knowledge that they would do this again tomorrow. In those moments, the crews felt suspended between the mechanics of duty and the weight of consequence. They were professional killers, but not indifferent men. The smell of smoke, even at altitude, lingered in their memory long after landing. And as their aircraft turned south, each man wondered, quietly, how much of Japan would be left when it was over. Angle 2. The tactical design. Fire by geometry. Behind the chaos of flame lay an exact pattern. The incendiary raids were not random destruction. They were equations written in fuel and wind. LeMay's planners at Baekduan Bomber Command studied meteorological charts as if composing music. They selected nights of strong surface wind and low humidity, perfect for spreading fire. Pathfinders dropped the first flares to create a cross pattern over the city, 2 lines intersecting to form zones. The bombers would follow these lanes, releasing their clusters in sequence, each formation slightly offset to merge the fires into one massive vortex. Tokyo's layout, Narrow streets, wood frame houses, open courtyards became part of the weapon. Fires from one neighborhood leapt to the next with astonishing speed. The term firestorm had been born in Hamburg and Dresden, but in Tokyo it achieved new magnitude. Inside the command center on Tinian, operations officers marked progress by radio reports. Primary ignited. Target area engulfed. Visibility nil. City burning. LeMay's tactical brilliance lay not in chaos, but in rhythm. He turned destruction into a process, calculated, reproducible, efficient. Each mission was logged, analyzed, improved. Altitude changes, bomb spacing, approach headings, every variable refined. By late March, Tokyo was only one among dozens of cities burned to cinders. The map of Japan began to look like a constellation of ash. And yet, even as the tactics grew perfect, the moral unease beneath them deepened. Angle the Third. The technological edge. Machines of fire. The B-29 Superfortress was the most advanced aircraft of its time. A laboratory in the sky. But in the low-altitude incendiary raids, its power became paradoxical. Originally engineered for precision daylight bombing, it was now stripped to the essentials. Crews removed armor plating, gun turrets, and even ammunition to save weight. The aircraft that once prided itself on defensive might now flew exposed. Fast, but fragile. Each was loaded with up to 16 tons of incendiaries. The M69 bomblet was the heart of the operation, a small metal cylinder barely 3 inches wide, yet capable of burning at 1,000 degrees C. When thousands of them fell together, they created a sea of flame that nothing could extinguish. The technology extended beyond the bombs themselves. The AN/APQ-13 radar allowed crews to navigate blind, even through cloud or smoke, identifying coastlines and river outlines. LeMay's crews became nocturnal predators guided not by sight, but by radio waves. The engineering genius that built the B-29, the pressurization systems, remote control turrets, high-efficiency engines, was now turned toward a simpler, darker goal: endurance. Keep the aircraft aloft. Deliver the load. Return. Repeat. The mechanics on Tinian worked tirelessly, often under blinding sunlight and sudden tropical rain. Engines failed frequently. Each one was a masterpiece of complexity and fragility. Spare parts were scavenged, swapped, improvised. Men slept beneath wings, woke to the roar of takeoff, and counted the returning aircraft in silence. Technology had given man wings, but it also gave him fire. And that fire was now falling, systematically, across an empire. The sky, the machines, and the men were in motion. But beneath them, a different world was awakening. On the ground, Japan was beginning to understand that this was no longer war as it had known it. It was survival against the sky itself. Angle 4, the enemy's defense, fighting fire with buckets for Japan. The nightmare arrived too late to be stopped. By 1945, the Imperial Home Defense Command was stretched thin, its resources consumed by a losing war on every front. The Japanese Army Air Service, once proud, was crippled by fuel shortages and the lack of trained pilots. Radar stations dotted the coasts, but their coverage was patchy, their communication lines unreliable. When the first wave of B-29s appeared on radar screens, Tokyo's anti-aircraft crews braced for high-altitude bombers. Instead, the alarms came too late. The Americans were already overhead, flying lower than expected. Searchlights swept empty skies while the bombers roared beneath the beams, invisible shadows moving in darkness. Japan's night fighters, mostly Nakajima J-1N Geckos, scrambled from distant fields, their radars primitive, their speed no match for the B-29s. By the time they reached Tokyo, the air was a wall of heat and turbulence. Many could not even enter the inferno. Some were torn from the sky by rising thermals and collapsing air pressure. On the ground, civilians fought with buckets of sand, bamboo ladders, and hand pumps. Volunteer fire brigades, often old men, women, and school children, formed desperate lines against a firestorm that fed on wind and oxygen. The conflagration created its own weather. Tornadoes of flame that lifted debris into the sky. Water boiled in the canals. Air raid shelters suffocated their occupants. The government's propaganda spoke of stoicism and duty, but in truth, Japan had no defense against what it called yakuchi, the burning from above. Every city knew it was next. Angle V. The leadership. LeMay's calculus of fire major. General Curtis LeMay was not a man easily haunted, but the responsibility he carried was immense. From his headquarters on Guam, he reviewed each mission with mechanical precision. Fuel consumption, bomb load, wind data, losses, and burn percentages. To LeMay, the equation was cruel but clear. A shorter war meant fewer deaths overall. He believed that terrorizing Japan's cities would shatter its will to fight before an invasion became necessary. His job was to end the war as fast as possible, by any means that would save American lives on the ground. He faced skepticism from Washington. The Joint Chiefs of Staff questioned whether incendiaries against civilians could be justified. Yet LeMay pressed on, convinced that hesitation cost more lives than fire. "If we lose the war," he would later remark, "we'll be tried as war criminals. But if we win, who will judge us?" The 20th Air Force became a machine under his will. Every sortie was logged, every inefficiency purged. Crews rotated through missions with mathematical precision. He removed weak commanders, enforced ruthless discipline, and demanded maximum output from men and metal alike. In his command briefings, he spoke little of morality. He spoke of efficiency, results, pressure. But those who served under him, men like Thomas Power and Haywood Hansel, understood that behind LeMay's coldness was an obsession with control. He believed that chaos could be engineered, and that through fire, peace could be forced. In the months that followed, his theory would be tested not once, but dozens of times, each new city becoming a data point in a grim experiment. Angle 6. The moral and strategic paradox. What began as military necessity soon transformed into moral reckoning. The incendiary raids blurred every line between war and horror. Factories, workshops, and homes all burned together, workers and children indistinguishable in the smoke. American intelligence justified the attacks under the doctrine of total war. If Japan's economy and population were intertwined, then every part of the system was a target. The objective was not annihilation, but acceleration, the collapse of resistance through exhaustion and despair. Yet even within the Allied ranks, unease spread. Some airmen called it fire terror. Chaplains struggled to find words for the nightly reports of destruction. The press releases spoke only of industrial areas neutralized, but the photographs told another story. Entire cities erased. The paradox of power was evident. Technology had given precision, but the strategy demanded obliteration. In the Japanese press, survivors described the raids as hells of wind and light. Mothers carried children through burning streets. Soldiers dug trenches to bury the uncounted dead. The war had become not a clash of armies, but of endurance, whose soul would break first. For the men who dropped the bombs, there was no time to reflect. Orders came daily, targets changed nightly. LeMay's machine never slept, and neither did Japan. Soon, the raids would escalate beyond anything the world had seen, an event so vast it would redefine the boundaries of warfare itself. The night of March 9th was chosen for its weather. Steady winds, clear skies over Tokyo, low humidity, and a strong north breeze to carry the flames. The B-29s lined up on Tinian's runways like silver ghosts under floodlight, their propellers spinning in unison. They were about to turn theory into fire. Operation Meetinghouse. The night Tokyo burned. The orders were sealed on March 9, 1945. At dusk, crews across Tinian prepared for what their commanders called a maximum effort raid. Few grasped what that meant. The target was Tokyo, the world's largest city. The method, low-altitude incendiary attack, was untested at this scale. By 1730 hours, engines began to thunder in unison. The island trembled as more than 330 B-29s rolled to the runway. Each bomber carried between 6 and 8 tons of incendiaries, M47 napalm tanks, and clusters of M69 bomblets. The aircraft lifted into the fading Pacific light one by one, climbing east into darkness. Their flight path stretched 1,500 miles over open ocean. In the lead formation was Brigadier General Thomas Power, commanding from the B-29 lead Tokyo. His orders were clear. Initiate the attack at 0.08 hours on March 10th. Wind direction from the north meant the fires would drive southward, consuming the densest districts of the capital. The approach at midnight. Radar screens on Japanese coasts flickered, ghost echoes sweeping in from the Pacific. Air raid sirens began to wail, but confusion reigned. Defenders expected the usual high-altitude strike. They scanned the upper sky and found nothing. Meanwhile, at 7,000 feet, the first Pathfinders crossed the coast at Chiba. The sea below reflected the faint silver of moonlight. Their radar scopes glowed green, Tokyo Bay ahead, the Sumida River winding like a dark vein through the city. The bombardier flipped the safety cover on his toggle switch. The pilot steadied the aircraft. At 0008, magnesium flares dropped through the clouds, trailing white fire. They drifted slowly, painting the wooden labyrinth below in brilliant, ghostly light. Seconds later, the first incendiary clusters fell. Within minutes, flames spread like spilled ink. The initial pattern, an X of fire, was laid across the eastern wards of Tokyo. Shitamachi, Honjo, Fukagawa, districts of small factories, tenements, and wooden homes. The fire began to feed itself. Descent into fire by 0030. Hundreds of bombers filled the sky, releasing their payloads in rhythmic sequence. The sound was unlike anything before, a mechanical heartbeat echoing across the capital. The bombs hissed as they fell. Each cluster split open mid-air, scattering 38 bomblets that burst into sticky jets of napalm. Streets became rivers of flame. Roof tiles exploded from heat. Entire blocks vanished in seconds. The oxygen vanished next. As the fires joined, the rising air created a massive updraft, a firestorm. Wind speeds reached 100 miles per hour, strong enough to tear people off their feet. The temperature climbed beyond 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Asphalt melted. Iron warped. Civilians ran for the canals, the only refuge left. But the canals boiled. Bridges collapsed under the heat, trapping thousands. Mothers clutched children. Soldiers pulled fire hoses that evaporated midstream. A U.S. crew member later described the sight, from above, as a solid sheet of red, like looking into the mouth of hell. Japanese civil defense reports recorded entire neighborhoods, vanished without trace. The fire moved, faster than any person could run. Wooden homes, paper walls, tatami floors, all fed the inferno. The sound was a roar, constant, elemental. The crews above inside the B-29s, the heat reached through the fuselage. Gunners saw sparks and debris climbing higher than their altitude. Some aircraft were struck by burning fragments drawn upward by the vortex. Crews smelled smoke even at 6,000 feet. Radio operators listened to scattered transmissions. Target area fully ablaze. Visibility nil due to fire. City engulfed. Despite the low altitude, Japanese flak was weak, sporadic. The fire consumed power lines, blinded spotlights, and silenced coordination centers. The few night fighters that managed to take off could not find the bombers in the chaos. For the Americans, it was the easiest mission to fly and the hardest to forget. The scale of destruction, Wairo 230, the attack ended. The last bombers turned south for Tinian, leaving behind a single burning wound 20 miles wide. Over 1,665 tons of incendiaries had been dropped in less than 3 hours. Tokyo was gone. The fires burned until dawn, consuming 16 square miles of the city. The official count listed nearly 100,000 dead, though later estimates suggest more. 1 million were left homeless. The city's industrial output, once scattered through its residential blocks, was obliterated. At sunrise, reconnaissance aircraft found only smoldering ruins, an ocean of ash punctuated by glowing embers. Streets once mapped on U.S. charts no longer existed. Rivers steamed. The imperial palace stood untouched, surrounded by devastation on every side. On Tinian, as crews landed, mechanics lined the runway and counted returning bombers. 279 came back, 14 did not. For a mission of such magnitude, the loss rate, barely 4%, was shockingly low. LeMay read the reports in silence. Then he ordered the same for the next night. The Tokyo raid was only the beginning. The logic of fire, proven so completely, would now become policy. In the coming weeks, LeMay's machine would move from city to city, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and beyond, turning nights into red horizons. The question was no longer could Japan be burned. It was how much was left to burn. The season of fire, Japan's cities fall. The raid on Tokyo was supposed to be a test. It became a blueprint. When the crews of the Waisat Bomber Command returned to Tinian, they brought with them the smell of ash and a set of maps now colored red. Analysts at headquarters studied the photographs. Square miles of the capital reduced to gray dust. The results stunned even the planners. For the first time, destruction had matched design. Within days, Curtis LeMay issued his next orders. Repeat it. The expansion of the fire campaign on March 11th, barely 24 hours after the Tokyo Inferno, 285 B-29s lifted off again, this time toward Nagoya. 2 nights later, Osaka. Then Kobe. Each city became a chapter in the same story. The tactics refined after every sortie. Bombing altitudes dropped even lower to 5,000 feet to ensure tighter saturation. The attack pattern shifted based on wind direction, designed to funnel fire through the city grid. By the end of March, more than 32 square miles of Japan's major cities had been reduced to ash. The raids ran with mechanical rhythm. Take off at dusk, return at dawn. Maintenance teams on Tinian worked without pause, refueling, rearming, replacing scorched engine cylinders before the next launch. Men stopped counting missions. The Pacific nights blurred into one continuous thunderous memory. The fire over Osaka and Kobe, Osaka, Japan's second-largest city, was an industrial powerhouse. Engines, shipyards, steel. But like Tokyo, its production was woven through wooden neighborhoods. On the night of March 13th, more than 270 B-29s arrived overhead. The first incendiary struck near the docks. Within minutes, a gale whipped flames into cyclones. Witnesses described fire columns taller than temples, pulling people and vehicles into the storm. Over 3,000 tons of bombs fell that night. 15 square miles disappeared. Kobe followed on March 16th, a port city surrounded by hills that trapped the heat. The flames there burned so intensely that melted copper ran through the streets like rivers. Every night, Radio Tokyo broadcast false assurances. Enemy attack repulsed. Damage minor. But the truth seeped through. The government evacuated hundreds of thousands, relocating families to rural regions. Yet the trains themselves became targets. For the first time, the Japanese Home Ministry quietly admitted what propaganda could not. The nation was burning faster than it could rebuild. The machine on Tinian by April 1945. Tinian was operating at the limits of human endurance. Every 24 hours, 1,000 aircraft movements crossed its runways. Ground crews averaged 2 hours of sleep. Cooks served meals on the wing edges, between sorties. Mechanics stripped damaged aircraft for usable parts and welded others together in the open air. And still the tempo increased. LeMay's planners now sought systematic annihilation. Each night, a new city was assigned. Toyama, Nagoya again, Hamamatsu, Omuta, Shizuoka, Kure, Yokohama, Toyama, known for its aluminum works, was 99% destroyed in a single night. Hamamatsu, center of aircraft engine production, burned until nothing remained. When a bomber crew returned to base, they were handed a new target folder before they'd even left the debriefing tent. The rhythm was relentless, the purpose clear: to make Japan's urban system collapse completely. The silent enemy below, Japan's night skies became a canvas of terror. Air raid sirens no longer meant action, they meant inevitability. Fighter squadrons scrambled, but their numbers dwindled. Aviation fuel was nearly gone. Airfields lay cratered or empty. The Imperial General Staff ordered civilians to construct fire breaks, but manpower was gone. Men were fighting in Okinawa. Women and children carried bricks and buckets in futility. One Japanese diary recovered after the war read simply, "Every night, the wind brings the smell of someone else's city." By May, half of Japan's major urban centers had been attacked. More than 160 square miles of built-up area destroyed. An estimated 330,000 civilians dead, millions displaced. Still, LeMay pressed on. "If it works," he told his staff, "keep doing it." The summer of exhaustion. As spring turned to summer, Japan's defenses collapsed in every sense. Electric power failed in dozens of cities. Rail transport was crippled. Industrial output fell to half of pre-war levels. And yet resistance from Tokyo's leadership continued. The emperor's ministers refused to surrender. Factories relocated into caves, but the fires reached even there. By June 1945, B-29s were bombing 6 nights a week. Entire urban prefectures were blackened wastelands. Even the smaller cities, once ignored for lack of significance, became targets simply because they existed. LeMay's forces introduced a new weapon: Operation Starvation, the aerial mining of Japan's harbors and waterways. B-29s dropped sea mines by night, cutting off shipping lanes and isolating the islands further. Starvation joined fire as a weapon. The world watches. The Allied press carried headlines, "Tokyo reduced to ash, Japan's cities ablaze." Yet public understanding was limited. The photographs were censored. The horror was measured only in tonnage and square miles. In Japan, the War Ministry's report spoke of declining morale and growing despair. People slept in fields, in mountains, anywhere beyond the reach of bombers. Government officials began whispering of defeat. And in July, something else appeared on the horizon. A new weapon, one that would condense all the power of fire into a single flash. When the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima that August, Japan was already broken. The nightly raids had turned sleep into fear, cities into memory. The nation was awake, trembling, and waiting for the end. The B-29s had fulfilled their design, beyond endurance, beyond reason. They had turned the sky into a factory of destruction, and Japan into a nation of smoke. But the firestorms, for all their fury, were not yet the final chapter. What followed would decide the war, and define its legacy. Ashes of Empire. By mid-July 1945, Japan was no longer a country in the modern sense. It was a map of ruins, an archipelago of blackened grids where cities once stood. From the air, reconnaissance photos showed little difference between Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, or Yokohama. Each was a gray scar, punctuated by rivers and skeletal bridges. The war's industrial heart had stopped beating. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, established to measure the campaign's results, would later confirm what the crews already knew. In just 5 months, the Aktipuan Bomber Command had destroyed 67 Japanese cities. Over 160 square miles of urban area were erased. An estimated 330,000 civilians were dead. More than 2 million homes were gone. Factories that survived the flames soon ran out of power, transport, and workers. Rail lines twisted from heat. Telephone poles turned to charcoal. Even those industries relocated to the countryside struggled. Parts could no longer move. Labor was scattered, and morale collapsed. Japan's once efficient war machine had dissolved into isolation and chaos, the burnt earth of a nation. From the ground, the devastation defied imagination. Tokyo's survivors described a city without shadows, no buildings tall enough to cast one. The streets were nothing but dust and brick fragments. In Osaka, entire districts were reduced to white ash so light that footsteps left trails like snow. Water pumps stood melted, their handles drooping toward the ground. Civilians lived in dugouts and makeshift shelters built from corrugated metal. They cooked over open fires amid the ruins. Disease spread with summer heat. Typhus, dysentery, malnutrition. For children born that spring, the sky itself was an enemy. Even distant thunder sent people running for cover. Yet production orders continued to come from Tokyo. Bureaucrats demanded reports, quotas, statistics. On paper, no one could print. The imperial cabinet still believed it could negotiate peace without surrender, while its citizens scavenged for rice in the ashes. The American calculus at LeMay's headquarters on Guam, the war looked like a ledger. Sorties flown, bomb tonnage dropped, cities destroyed, loss rates minimal. The numbers told a story of precision and progress, but to many of the airmen, the meaning behind those figures was harder to read. Returning crews watched the reconnaissance films in silence, seeing streets they could trace, neighborhoods they remembered, now blank gray squares. LeMay himself remained unflinching. "Our mission," he said in one briefing, "is to destroy the enemy's capability to make war. Nothing else." He had achieved that with ruthless efficiency. In July, he began planning what he called the final systematic phase. A series of firebombings to eliminate every remaining industrial city before the expected invasion of Japan's main islands. Operation Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu, was scheduled for November. Every burned factory, every collapsed power line, meant fewer Japanese soldiers armed and supplied when American troops landed. But the question of necessity grew heavier. The combined effects of air raids, sea blockade, and fuel shortage had already reduced Japan's war economy to a fraction of its size. Admiral William Leahy, President Truman's chief of staff, noted privately that Japan was defenseless against air attack. And still, the bombers flew. The shifting tide in late July, Operation Starvation had mined nearly every harbor. Coastal shipping ceased. Famine spread inland. The Japanese government, desperate to maintain order, established emergency cremation fields for the dead. For the first time, Emperor Hirohito requested detailed briefings on the bombings. He was shown photographs of Tokyo after March 10th, mile after mile of flattened neighborhoods. Witnesses recalled his silence. Meanwhile, LeMay's bombers turned toward smaller targets: Aomori, Fukui, Oita, Kumagaya. Even towns of 50,000 people were struck. To the crews, these missions felt almost merciless. No anti-aircraft fire, no resistance, only more fire and more smoke. By early August, few cities remained untouched. Japan had become a geography of ashes, waiting for the next catastrophe. And then, that catastrophe came. Not from the night sky, but from the morning sun over Hiroshima. The fire raids had already changed the war. What came next would change the world itself. The end of the fire. The morning of August 6, 1945, began like any other in war-torn Japan. Sirens, fatigue, and a gray sky above Hiroshima. Then, at 8:15 a.m., a single B-29 named Enola Gay appeared. It carried no incendiaries, no clusters of M69s. Just one weapon, nicknamed Little Boy. When the atomic bomb detonated, a new kind of fire was born. Brighter than the sun, hotter than anything man had ever created. The blast erased the heart of Hiroshima in seconds. 70,000 people vanished almost instantly. A black rain fell across the ruins, and the era of conventional firebombing suddenly felt like a prelude. LeMay's bombers were grounded that day. Not from remorse, but from strategy. Within 3 days, another city, Nagasaki, was destroyed by a second bomb. And while nuclear power captured the world's horror, it was the months of fire before it that had already hollowed Japan's will to resist. A nation unraveling, Japan's leaders faced a reality beyond denial. The Imperial Army could no longer defend the homeland. The Navy was a memory. Industry was dust. Reports from provincial governors painted the same picture. No food, no fuel, no future. The emperor, in private meetings, spoke of the continuing annihilation of the people. On August 9th, After Nagasaki, he convened the Imperial Council. Half demanded continued resistance. The others urged surrender. That night, B-29s struck again. Not with atomic bombs, but with more incendiaries, as if to remind Japan that conventional hell still waited in reserve. On August 14th, Emperor Hirohito recorded his decision. The first time a Japanese ruler would speak directly to his people. His voice, trembling yet resolute, was broadcast the next day. He told the nation that continuing the war would mean nothing less than the extinction of human civilization. The words fell over a country already buried in smoke, occupation, and reckoning. When American troops landed weeks later, they found cities so devastated that even seasoned war correspondents were stunned. Tokyo looked like the surface of another planet, flat, gray, silent. Streets were marked by stone foundations where homes once stood. Children wandered barefoot among ruins. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that the incendiary campaign had done more damage than the atomic bombs combined. In their estimate, if the war had continued, Japan's cities would have been completely destroyed by the end of 1945. Factories had ceased functioning months before surrender. Railways were twisted skeletons. The once mighty aircraft industry had fallen silent. And yet amid the rubble, something began to stir. The faint pulse of survival. American engineers helped rebuild water lines and power grids. Food shipments arrived. Civilians, half-starved, began sweeping the streets of ash. The cities that once burned were already planning their rebirth. LeMay's legacy, Curtis LeMay, was promoted to lieutenant general after the war. He received no reprimand, no condemnation. Among military strategists, he was hailed as the architect of strategic air power, the man who proved that a nation could be broken not by invasion, but by the sky. Privately, he remained unrepentant. When asked if he regretted the scale of civilian deaths, he replied, "No, killing had to be done. The war had to be won." For Japan, the scars would endure for generations. For the world, the lesson was hauntingly clear. Human ingenuity had outpaced human restraint. The firebombings blurred the boundary between military target and humanity itself. And though the atomic bomb ended the war, it was LeMay's B-29s that had already shown what modern war could become. Industrialized destruction, precise in design, limitless in consequence. By the time Japan surrendered, the fires had ceased, but their glow lingered in the minds of those who flew, those who burned, and those who rebuilt. The empire had fallen not just to power, but to the weight of its own exhaustion. And beneath the ruins, the first seeds of a new Japan waited, silent beneath the ash. The story of the B-29s did not end with surrender. It became the foundation for the Cold War's new logic, deterrence through terror. But in 1945, amid the smoldering remains of Tokyo, the world was left with one question only. What had all that fire truly won? The sleep that never returned. When the engines finally went silent, the Pacific night grew still again. The airfields of Tinian, once roaring with life, metal, and fire, fell quiet beneath the stars. Rows of B-29s stood idle, their aluminum skins dulled by salt and ash. The men who had flown them walked in silence, carrying the strange emptiness that follows total victory. For Japan, the war had ended. But the memory of those nights, of the sky that burned, did not fade. The cities rose again in time, rebuilt from ruin, steel replacing wood, glass replacing paper. Yet in every foundation, beneath every subway line and tower, lay the memory of a night when the world itself seemed to be on fire. The firebombing of Japan remains one of history's starkest paradoxes, an act of destruction so complete it achieved what diplomacy could not: surrender. It proved that science could wage war without battlefields. That distance no longer protected the innocent. It showed the price of modernity, paid in cities turned to cinder. For Curtis LeMay and his airmen, the mission had always been about ending the war quickly. But history remembers something deeper: that in trying to make war efficient, humanity learned how easily it could destroy itself. The B-29 was a masterpiece of engineering, a monument to human brilliance and human blindness. Its engines carried both courage and catastrophe. Its contrails marked the path from industrial might to moral reckoning. When the flames died, the world entered a new era, one defined not by cities that could burn, but by weapons that could erase them entirely. The B-29 had opened the door, and the atomic age had walked through. Today, the hum of engines over a peaceful Tokyo sky carries a different sound. The sound of survival. The city that once stopped sleeping now glows with light again. Alive, defiant, eternal. But somewhere in the wind, beneath the neon and the noise, still lingers the faint echo of that March night in 1945. The night when the B-29s returned. Again and again, until Japan finally stopped sleeping. If this story moved you, share it. The firebombing of Japan isn't just history, it's a warning. A reminder of how technology, in human hands, can build or burn the world. Subscribe for more untold stories from the battlefields of World War II, where strategy met sacrifice, where machines changed history, and where the truth still burns through the smoke of war. This was When B-29s Returned Night After Night, and Japan finally stopped sleeping. Until next time, keep questioning the past, because the answers still echo in our skies.